And I was like, man, this was a long day. It's still Sunday. Oh, man. So, yeah, it was a really great day, but it just kind of came in all these different phases. Where,
all right, so once listening groups and back to school bashes and all of that are over, what does a normal Sunday post worship look like for you?
It's usually
it's just a big out breath of just all the oxygen just leaves. And
well, it takes a lot because, so Emma works at a different church on Sundays. And so it's usually whoever has the kids, or if we've split them up and then we got to figure out what's lunch, we're picking something up or cooking, and then we come back. Sometimes there'll be an event on Sundays, but not a lot. A lot of church events don't happen on Sunday afternoons and evenings regularly.
Sure.
There'll be like special one-time things. But yeah, usually it's... we try to tell the kids, okay, this is quiet time now. So whether they listen or not varies, but take a nap, chill out, rest. And then that evening, on most weeks, once we're in the school year, it's get ready for, did we go to the grocery store? Did we do the laundry? Do we have things planned out? Did the kids do whatever homework they were supposed to do?
And football season starts.
All the things. Well, absolutely.
That kind of dictates my post church regimen. And it always feels weird that after that last postseason game where they have that 2 weeks before the Super Bowl, which it's too long. Just do it the next week.
There's college football now in there, so it fills it up for me.
I've kind of, by the time the Super Bowl starts, I'm just like, oh yeah, football season. There's still one more game.
It's still going.
Yeah, it's just there's that big break where everybody's just like, well, what do we do? And
yeah,
I don't know. But I'm very, very excited for football season to start. But like you, I could not care less about preseason.
Yeah, I'm
sorry. If there's nothing at stake, like what? Cool, we get to see the rookies. All right, great. That's fine. I don't care that much.
No, not for me.
Anyway, let's talk about Jesus.
Jesus.
All right, so we talked about one of the most talked about people, I would say, outside of Jesus. I don't know, who would you say is like the most talked about name? Probably Paul.
I was going to say Paul.
And David is up there.
Very close. Yeah, David or maybe Abraham or Isaiah, just because they get referenced a lot.
Moses, not as much, but Moses' thing is so specific where like you don't hear a lot of references to Moses in the New Testament or anything, or even the Exodus. The Exodus, you hear about Passover.
Right, yeah.
But I don't know. So yeah, like
law,
David is up there. Which is pretty crazy. And we didn't even talk about half the other stuff that he did. Just the kind of hit the basic points.
Yeah, and that's the hardest part about doing any kind of a sermon about a character in Scripture. And those are some of my favorite sermons to do, just because I think that people are relatable, and I think stories about people in Scripture are a lot easier to get through and to understand and to relate to than, there are some parts like in Paul's letters where it's just it just feels like a sermon. I mean, it's just a lot of dense, here's what I think about this, here's how this works. But if you're just reading a narrative about, people, I feel like it's easier to relate to. The problem with that is for someone like David, there's just so much. I mean, he goes on. I mean, his story is included or referenced in multiple books, whereas like Esther, it's a pretty contained narrative. You know, you can talk about Esther in a pretty contained way, but David, Moses, some of these characters, their stories go on for so long, and there are so many pivotal things that happen within their lifespan that it's hard to know from a preaching standpoint, what do you focus on?
Yeah. So how did you choose?
Well, for this one, so the whole point of this series was about how Scripture kind of introduces us to these people. And in some ways, I stayed true to that in David's case, like the Scripture we read was the first time we meet him when Samuel anoints him as king.
Well, yeah, like he's out in the field and playing his lyre probably. And all right.
A lot of where the series went was sort of the impact that person had, or the legacy they left, or kind of some of the major takeaways from their life. So the sermon didn't focus as much on. Whereas, like in week 1, because I was introducing myself too, like it was very specific to how do we get introduced to Jesus in the Gospel of John.
Oh, you'll be introducing yourself continually through the next, at least 5 or 6 podcasts.
Absolutely, but
I assume that's why, like a lot of people are just like, oh, but I just started watching the podcast. I'm like, just now, all right. Well, oh, by the way, this is episode
number 30. Milestone.
Big deal.
Should have got a cake.
Right. Yeah, I should have brought a cake. I'll just drink my coffee.
There you go.
Anyway, so introducing these people and how they are introduced to us.
Right. But what it kind of morphed into, because that was a very contained sermon in week 1 about how is John introducing Jesus to us and why does he do it so intentionally. Whereas the other characters, I mean, the way we're introduced to Esther is not that interesting to talk about. It's what Esther did that it's more interesting to talk about. And in David's life, that story of him being anointed is interesting in the way that it functions within the Hebrew culture moving from a tribal federation into a kingdom. But that story itself is, his anointing is not super interesting beyond the fact of, he was the runt of the litter, and he was the unlikely one. But the fun parts of David's story come later. So I kind of moved and shifted into an overview of a person and how did what can we take away from David's life, and more than any one specific part of it.
So I'm glad you said it morphed into this other thing. How often, when you're coming up with not specifically a sermon but a series, does it end up being something noticeably different than where you originally started?
Yeah, so I always try to learn from the mistakes of the Star Wars sequels, where it seemed really obvious that
the
sequels, where it seemed really obvious that they didn't have a plan for what they were doing with those 3, or if they did, they didn't follow it.
Well, yeah, because the first one, The Force Awakens, it's literally just A New Hope.
It's a redo of A New Hope. Yeah, it's like shot for shot remake.
It's now, fortunately, it's really good, and like I do love Kylo Ren. I wish they would have waited until like when he saw Han Solo to take his helmet off for the first time.
The unmasking happened way too fast.
That's the only thing I would have changed.
Yeah, the unmasking was too fast because he was this very dark, scary, ominous figure like Darth Vader was. But then when you take, especially because it was a famous actor, it's like, oh, that's just Adam Driver. So,
but the voice for Kylo is
well, when you're trying to follow up James Earl Jones as the voice of Darth Vader, like the voice modulator that he had, but when he takes the mask off, it's just Adam Driver, and I'm like, you're not scary.
They added a scar.
Yeah, I'm like, okay, whatever. Anyway, so the sequels, it seemed like they didn't really have a plan for where they were going, and that got them into trouble as they went through it.
So episode 7 was actually fine. I really enjoyed it.
The first one.
Yeah, but then the second one where they go to the stupid like gambling planet.
Yeah, they really go off the rails.
And like, here's the thing. The guy who did that movie, I'm like Ryan Johnson. I'm actually a fan of his work. He did this really cool movie called Brick, which was launched Joseph Gordon-Levitt's career. And it's this random movie, and you're like, wow, that movie's check it out, Brick. It's really good. And when I found out, wait, that's the guy that, how did he land Star Wars? B, how did he mess it up so bad?
Yeah.
I would say that movie is worse than any of the prequels.
It's rough. I mean, there's just so many plot points that end up it's just bad screenwriting. A lot of the plot points don't have any impact on the story. Anyway, so when I'm writing a series, I've made that mistake many times. And the classic conundrum I find myself in most frequently when it goes wrong is I have an idea, and I think I have an idea for a series, but really what I have an idea for is a sermon. And it's not that there's a difference in there. And for a good series, it has to either build or there has to be multiple parts, or like this, like we're talking about multiple different characters. And so I have done series where you kind of, all the things you wanted to say, you say in week 1, and then you have to sort of figure out how you're going to go from there. And so making that mistake many times now, I've really tried to be careful when I'm planning out a series to ask myself, the first question I ask is this really a whole series or is this just one sermon? And that's where I've had to shift it. And some of them are obvious, like this one, you're going to talk about different characters. The next series we're starting, not this coming week, but after that, is going to walk through sort of the foundation of the sources we use in the United Methodist Church, which
You
is
heard it here first.
there you go. Which is the quadrilateral is the kind of theological term we've attached to that, but it's using our scripture, our reason, our tradition, and our experience to inform what we know and understand about God. And so that's easy to move into a series because it has these 4 parts. I mean, we're going to do it over 3 weeks just because of the calendar, but that's an easy one to know because you have kind of a pre-built topic to talk about each week.
Sure.
Sometimes I'll have an idea about, we're going to talk about grief. And really, I have one thing I want to say, but I'll write it out. I'm like, we're going to talk about grief at home and grief at work and grief in all these different, or stress at home and stress at work. But really, the answer is to do the same thing. And so I feel like I'm just giving the same sermon over and over and over again, and that makes for a bad series.
I can see that.
You got to make sure you're careful when you're planning.
Well, something with like these characters, you have such unique stories. I mean, between the Exodus, between Esther, now David, like these are incredibly unique characters that there aren't a lot of parallels. It's just they are their own background and story, and I thought that was interesting. And you mentioned you re-brought up kind of the Exodus of them wandering the desert for 40 years, and when you said that, one of the things that crossed my mind, I don't know if I've ever thought about this. Why do you think God didn't let Moses into the promised land?
Oh man, I know it feels cruel. Like
he sets this whole thing up, gonna get you to the land of milk and honey, and then he lets him see it. And he's like, "Dead."
I know, and part of me, I had some interesting. I don't remember if I read a book about this or heard a sermon about it or something, but I remember thinking, you couldn't let him go home? And then someone said, well, he'd never been there before. And that's why it dawned on me like, oh, that's true. Like when we always talk about they're returning to the promised land, and we think about it like in the terms of the exile. So when they go into the exile hundreds of years later, they long to return home. And a lot of those stories from exile are the people who were taken into exile wanting to return home. Yeah. So that idea of coming back is very core. In the Exodus, I mean, it's been hundreds of years. I mean, it was their ancestors. So you're talking about, like, for a modern day equivalent, like, it would have been like you left England even longer ago than the United States even exists. And so I wouldn't have any connection to that. If we were returning to the land or something and it happened 400 years ago, I would say, I don't know anything about that place. And so that was helpful for me to put it in my mind is Moses is not going home. None of these people are going home. They're going to the land promised to their ancestors. Right. And that's why you see when they're in the desert, a lot of them are like, we should have stayed in Egypt. Like, it would have been better for us to die in Egypt. And underlining that is that was their home. And yeah, they were oppressed and yeah, they were enslaved and it wasn't good. But it's not like they were trying to go back to a place that they knew. They were going to somewhere they had never been before. And so the answer to your question, though, I think that is the hardest is what I talked about on Sunday about David knowing what was his to do and what was not his to do, is he wanted to build the temple, but that wasn't his calling. That was for Solomon. And I think in a lot of ways, Moses' job was to get them out of Egypt, but it wasn't his job to take them into the promised land. That was someone else's to do. And so it does feel like he got them there, but he didn't get to finish the journey. But in some ways he did, because that was his calling, was to get them to the promised land.
It's like he got to bake the cake, but he never got to eat it.
And I've experienced this a little bit myself. So the church plant that I worked in, I followed the founding pastor, and we were meeting at the time. We weren't still in a school. Thank God I didn't have to do the chair setup every week.
Oh, have you done that before?
But in other instances, yes. Not long term, but
it's brutal.
It is brutal. So thankfully, we were meeting in an old church that had closed. And so we had some semi-permanence where we could, leave all of our stuff in the building and it was kind of ours. It was also a burden because it was not in great shape. It was falling apart, had a gravel parking lot. It was not good. But we didn't have to do kind of the setup. But we were looking for a permanent home. So we were trying to buy land and build a building and do all of this. And in the 4 years that I was there, we were able to, we kind of rebranded and relaunched and created a new identity. We bought a piece of land, got a contractor, designed the building, and then I got moved during COVID. And so I didn't get to see the building get built. And so a little bit I was like, I felt a little connection to Moses because this is a part of my call story too. is Moses is who I've always connected with in my call story, because he argued with God and didn't want to go. And
you
I
mentioned that.
didn't either. Yeah. And I had not really made that parallel until years after, when it was probably a year ago, the building got built. Maybe it was just last fall. They opened the building that we had, bought the land for and planned. It took, with COVID, it got delayed by years, but they finally finished it. And so they invited all the former pastors to come back for the consecration. And so like the founding pastor was there, and I was there, and several others were there. And that was so cool, because I was walking through hallways, and I found there was a yellow legal pad and some napkins that we had sketched out what we wanted the building to look like. And I was walking through the hallways, I was walking through this building that we drew by hand. And it wasn't the same, because it morphs as you do that. But that was a really surreal moment of just kind of seeing that come to fruition. I remembered standing in that field when we bought it, and we sang Standing on the Promises, because it was like, we're standing on the promises of God and all those who came before who got us here. And it was this very emotional moment. But then I didn't get to be there for the building to be built. So when I went back and it was open, I was like, this is so cool. And there was a lot of jealousy where I was like, we worked so hard, I never got to be here. And so it wasn't until then that I realized that my connection to Moses just has continued, because in a lot of ways for that church plant, we were wandering in the desert in a lot of ways. We didn't really have a home. We kind of had a halfway, but not really a home. And we were trying to find our permanent home. The land that we felt God had promised to us existed out there. We found it, but then I got moved before he built the building. And so
so that brings up a good question that I've experienced somewhat in my last few years of ministry and things. I kind of want to get your take on the difference between being a part of something kind of from the grassroots and helping build it, versus inheriting something that there's still things to do, but you have kind of a fully functioning, momentum machine that's already got it's already got, it's on the tracks, it's moving, and inheriting that. Because the previous church I was at, I inherited this monstrosity of a tech program, and I was just kind of there to maintain it. And I put my touch on a few things here and there, but overall I felt like, well, man, what do I do? There's everything works. And so, as you coming into a church that's got a lot of great things going for it, there's room for creativity, there's room for building, but how do you kind of balance those things? Because now you're telling me you were part of that building process, but you've inherited something that has got some legs already.
Definitely. I've experienced multiple different versions of that journey you talk about, and building something, whether you build it from scratch or you come in kind of at an early phase, is really cool. It's hard. And I mean, it really takes everything you have to make it work. And even then, a lot of times it doesn't work, but it's tough. So both in the church plant I was a part of, even though I didn't start it, it changed constantly, and we were trying to figure out what worked, and buying a new piece of land, and we kind of rebranded the church. So in a lot of ways, we kind of made that our own when we were there. And so I felt a little bit of that. But years before, I was a part of a nonprofit mission trip program that one of my friends started, and I was involved in it kind of from the very beginning. And we led worship. It was like a junior high mission trip project. And we would go and lead worship, and then I started designing graphics and running the website, and eventually I became the executive director of the organization, because we were trying to move it into permanence. It was kind of our friend Christy had started it, and she had gotten a bunch of her friends to sort of help make this happen, and we were trying to run a nonprofit. None of us had any idea what we were doing. And so we were trying to make it happen. And after it had existed for about 10 years, we were like, we love this thing. But none of us, at the time, we were all in college or early. We didn't have kids. A lot of us weren't married. We had a ton of time to pour into this.
Sure.
But after a while, we had careers and kids, and we couldn't spend hours and weeks over the summer doing this. And so we knew it needed to change into an organization. We needed to either get grant funding or whatever. And so we tried to shift that, and it turned out that it wasn't meant to be in the long run. It was an incredible season that lasted for about 10 years. That was one of the best things I ever did. And that I say all that to say, I was very much a part of creating that identity and being a part of what that organization was going to be like. And as we moved through the years and newer people came in who weren't there in the beginning, they would have new ideas and it would shift. And part of me was excited when the ideas, I liked them, but in a lot of ways I was super protective and defensive about like, we started this, that's not who we are, but that's not really true. It's just, that's not what it used to be. And I used to always be the young one who was trying to, buck the trends. And I would hate when people said, we always did it that way. And then I immediately became that person where I was like, no, this is not how we do. We've always done it this way. How dare you change this thing that we started? You weren't here. You haven't put the time in. And so there's a struggle for that. But I think there's such joy to not be in kind of scrappy insurgency. And that's where, the coming out of the church plant into my last church, which we celebrated 70 years at that church. So that church had a long history. It was incredibly stable. It was in a very stable part of Dallas that has very low turnover. So people have been a part of the church forever. And that was such a kind of a balm to my exhaustion that I didn't realize I had. Because when you're running a church plant, you are working constantly. I mean, it saps everything out of you. And so coming in, it took me probably 6 months to detox from the stress and the pace.
Never heard somebody refer to
you have to
detoxing from a church job. That's
because
fantastic.
You're going so fast
and
you're so stressed out. And it got to the point where some of the leadership would say, like, it's going to be okay. People will show up this Sunday. People will give regularly. They have for 70 years. And I needed someone to say that to me because in the church plant, you didn't know if people were going to show up. You didn't know if you were going to have a job in the next month.
Yeah, building it from nothing, it just feels like it's all on your shoulders.
It's tough. So here, coming into Creekwood, and I've talked about this a lot in the listening groups we've been in because people have asked, like, what's your vision for the church? And Leslie and I kind of look at each other like, well, we have ideas and we have hopes and we have things like visions for how we see the modern Christian church functioning in society, but we just got here. And so I don't have this huge vision because I want to learn. It needs to be Creekwood's vision. It needs to come from the people. And so a lot of what my vision is I don't know yet because I'm still learning the nature of the church and what's going well and where God is calling us. But one of the things that I have been sharing is I feel like Creekwood is in this Goldilocks zone where the church is, and you heard the speech last night because you were there. But I feel like
it's a good speech.
There's this point where Creekwood is both big enough to be able to do ministry and have critical mass when you need to break up in age level ministries, but it's not so big that you're just a number lost in the crowd. And the church is old enough that it has stability and consistency and tradition, but it's also young enough that we still have that scrappiness and that fighter. Like a lot of people remember the church plant and have that willingness to try new things and open to change. And so I really feel like that's been my perspective as I've come into Creekwood is it's not a new thing, but it's not a set in its ways, been doing the same thing for 100 years thing.
Yeah.
And it's not, there's not like one key problem. A lot of churches I've walked into, it's like, well, the building flooded and now we've got to fix it, or COVID is hit, or we're in tremendous debt, or we don't have any youth, or there's usually like one or two major problems. And unless I just haven't found it yet, there's not like a major problem at Creekwood. It seems like we've got good stability and momentum, and there's things that need attention and things that need, work. But for the most part, it seems like we're in a really great spot.
Yeah. And the church, I could tell you, I came in and the word I would use is I was pretty feisty from the get-go because my first Sunday leading worship was January 8th of 2024. And I did one worship service and like let it happen. I had been studying like previous ones by watching online, and I had been attending for several weeks to watch how previous worship leader was doing it. And so I was like, all right, I have lots of feelings and opinions, but I'm going to do it one time, see how it feels, with me at the helm. And I came in the next Monday morning with this big old thing with David, and I was just like, here's all the stuff I want to change. I don't like this. I don't like this. I don't like this. I don't like And David just kind of sat there and he goes, okay, do it. I was like, oh.
What?
I was not expecting it. He's
Right.
like, you didn't need to write all this out.
Like,
That's
but
just,
David, you shouldn't negotiate with terrorists. Like you don't know what you've done.
And so we just completely revamped the worship structure and we changed a bunch of different things. And then I kept doing that. And the church was so receptive to it. And then, but they were also, it wasn't like they weren't paying attention. The church was, I would have people regularly come up almost every week say like, I love that you're doing this now. Oh, I love that you switched this, or I'm glad you stopped doing this, or so. It just depends on the person, depends on the thing. But it told me, okay, this church is receptive to new ideas and they're not going to reject it. And so, that's cool. Cause I remember my first, full-time church job, this would have been probably 2010, I think, is when I was like, all right, I'm going to work just for a church. And I'd been doing like a bunch of ministry stuff, and I was doing like Wednesday night youth worship leading back then. I was like, all right, I got my first full church gig. They said no to everything. Every idea I had, there was somebody there with a big stop sign, like, no, don't change this. And then the one thing that I did change, which I didn't even change it, it was one of those things where this thing needed to change, and the lead pastor was like, all right, well, let's use this transition to kill this thing off, because this thing has been just on life support for over a year, and so we're going to kill it. And then everybody blamed me and was super mad at me for killing something.
Sure, yeah.
And so just things like that, but my experience could not be more opposite here. And maybe that's unique, maybe it's not, I don't know, but I love it. And so,
yeah, and it's you got to find that balance, because there are things that you naturally are going to do differently. And when a new leader comes in at any level, their personality, their skill set, their preferences, there are things that I do differently than David did, just because we're different people. And the line is trying to figure out, how do you be true to who you are and also not change the essence of who the church is, because that's not your job, and then figure the rest out together. And I think that's where these listening groups have been really helpful. And there's one question on there that everyone kind of laughs at, is there's several questions we ask on the written form. And one of them is like, what are you hoping that, we'll do as the new pastors? And what is something that you're afraid that we'll do as the pastors? And a lot of people are like, oh, what am I? I don't know that I'm afraid you're going to do anything. But I've asked that question in every church, and it's happened here too. Somebody will write, I'm afraid that you won't do anything, or you won't change anything, or you'll be afraid to make changes. And it's someone who knows that, consistency is good, but new ideas are good. And you have to keep up with the times and change and innovation. We want to make sure that we are being creative and innovative. And that is always so wonderful to hear both of those things, because you want to preserve what is, sacred, and the traditions of the church and the identity and the DNA of the church. But you want to make sure you're not getting left behind. And a lot of churches struggle to stay up to date with cultural trends in society.
Yeah.
And it's hard to know where that line is. So we've already talked about several of those things. Like, we're having a planning meeting later this week with the staff, just looking at events and worship for the year. And there's already some things about like the regular flow of worship, or like the, back to school things that we're doing this Sunday. I mean, there's already some things that we've talked about. Do we want to, hey, what if we tried this? Or what if we shifted this? Or what if we, edited or changed this, or tried something new? And I think that's the beauty of having new people come in when you do it intentionally, is sitting around some of these tables already with the staff. You have a real diversity of experience levels with Creekwood. And so you've got like Leslie and I, who are brand new, but we've worked in several other churches. And, Brock's been here for 6 months. You've been here for a year and a half. Kevin's been here for about a year and a half. But Caitlin's been here for 10 years. And Hannah's been here for almost 25 years. And so you've got both institutional memory and new, fresh eyes.
Yeah.
And you've got people who have seen Creekwood go through many seasons, so they know what has worked and what hasn't worked, what we've done before. And you've got some people like Leslie and I together have probably worked worked at 20 different churches. And so we have seen what has worked in other instances, which just gives you creativity in the brainstorming session to say, hey, what if we thought about doing this? Or what if we tried this? And we can breathe some new idea generation. And people who've been here for a long time can say, oh, we've never tried that. Let's do it. Or no, we tried that. It went terribly wrong. And so having all of that in one room, I think is the secret sauce of being able to bounce ideas around, but then moderate them.
There's a lot of experience under this roof, just in the staff, and then the volunteers. There's a lot of experience there. We are not lacking in experience and
ideas.
Years of ministry, sacrifice, and all these things, and catching new ideas, and So, for example, I love getting to look at what other people are doing, and so this Sunday, because the youth are leading, I'm going to take my time for the early worship service, and I'm going to go visit another church.
Yeah.
Oh, I love doing R&D. I love it. And here's the thing.
It's the best.
It really is.
You walk into a new church and you're like, why do you do that?
Yeah. And then sometimes it's going to do one of either two things. It's either going to make you go, oh, how did I not think to do that?
Yeah.
Or it's going to make you go, ooh, man, we're doing pretty good, I think.
Yeah. 1,000%. I've done that digitally many times because work on Sunday mornings, it's hard to get away on a Sunday.
It is hard.
If you do, it's usually on vacation.
It feels really good to be able to step into another church space as a professional you can't help but analyze everything.
Yeah, and I'm like, don't be judgmental. Don't be judgmental. Because we do, in our United Methodist denomination, we get together all the time for meetings and conferences. And so I'm in other United Methodist churches. The trick I try to, when I can, is to go to something very different.
Yeah.
Because they're going to do things differently. And you need to get outside of your little bubble. But for a lot of these events and meetings that I go to, I am finding myself in different churches. And every time, if I'm in a sanctuary, I'm taking everything. I'm taking everything I see in the pew, every flyer I see in the narthex. I mean, if it is there, I'm taking it so that I can see, what do you do well? What can I steal? What can I feel better about myself? Because at least we're not doing this garbage.
Yeah.
And it really does. Because the number of times, I love the way that you said that. The number of times I've walked into a church and I'm like, why didn't I think of that? That makes so much sense. Now I feel like a moron.
Yeah.
And so that's fantastic when you have that, because then you just take it up and start doing it.
We'll sprinkle this idea into my own worship. And
it is helpful.
And then it just continues to make everything good. I'm looking forward to it. All right. So I got one more thing that I want to close on, because I have a feeling it's going to tie into something we started talking about a couple of weeks ago with verbal storytelling, and then eventually it gets written down. And so by then numbers have been exaggerated and whatnot. But how tall was Goliath, do you think?
Okay. I'm glad that you said this. So,
we have thoughts. I can tell.
One, I don't know. So he,
what does it say? Like 9 feet tall or something like that?
Yeah. I mean, there's different, I have heard a couple of different interpretations for how his height was calculated. Some of them say he was maybe 6'10" or 7 feet.
That's what I'm
tall
thinking. He's gotta be
a human.
6'10".
And sometimes it's he was 9'5". Now, the interest in all of this is that book that I was talking about in the sermon, the Malcolm Gladwell book, David and Goliath. He goes into, I cannot recommend Malcolm Gladwell enough in general, but this book is so fascinating, especially if you're a Christian, because you're going to have such a connection to this opening metaphor he uses. And if you don't want to read the whole book, he's given TED Talks where he kind of summarizes the point about David and Goliath. But his what can I say? His hypothesis didn't come from him, but his sort of assertion is that Goliath had a condition called agromegaly, and that is I think it's a tumor on the pituitary gland that overproduces human growth hormone. Basically, anybody who's abnormally tall, the tallest people ever, and usually if they die really young, they have agromegaly.
Yeah,
they
Robert
have this
Wadlow
condition.
Was 5, I
Super
think,
young.
when he died.
Yeah. Have you seen there's pictures and videos of him, and it's wild.
Oh yeah,
to see.
I've been to Alton, Illinois, where he was from, and you could sit in the chair that was custom. Well, he was 8'11.5", so he was
insane.
9 feet tall.
Right.
He was actually 9 feet tall, and the chair that was custom made for him, you feel like a toddler. Like if your back is up against it, your ankles hang off the part where his knees start to bend because he was so massive.
Well, I don't know if you've ever
and you
even
can stand next to the statue and you feel like a toddler holding his hand. You're just like, oh.
Well, and if you've ever been near someone who's even close to 7 feet tall, you feel like a tiny person.
You do. If you ever hang out around NBA players, you're just like, is something wrong with me?
There's still 2 more feet.
Yeah.
To Wadlow. Anyway, so this condition is what he believes that Goliath had. And the reason is because when you look at the symptoms of acromegaly, it's like you can't see very well, and you your joints, you struggle with joint mobility and I can't quote all. It's been a long time since I read the book, but if you read the story, there's some weird parts of David and Goliath, because when he's walking, first of all, he's got a shield bearer. Well, why does a soldier have somebody carrying his equipment? That's a little odd. And then when he comes down, it's like he can't see. He's like, why are you coming at me with sticks? And it's like, but he only had one wide. And so seeing double, or you can't see very well. So Malcolm Gladwell sort of uses the scriptural text to infer, it feels like some of the things we see in that story would align with someone who had this condition, both in his size and some of the weird elements that are just kind of odd in that story.
So it was more just the fact that he was imposing. He wasn't a great warrior or anything.
Was he really a great warrior? Yeah.
Or was he just really tall?
Well, and I come back to the same thing. I'm sure you've seen the movie Troy.
Of course.
But in that, opening scene, you get sort of a little version of David and Goliath.
Achilles versus Boagrius.
Yeah, exactly. And he goes out, and Boagrius is this huge, hulking guy.
Nathan Jones is, I think, that actor's name, who was in the WWE for a hot second.
He's huge.
And now Nathan Jones has been in I'm not kidding when I say 15 movies, and he's the same guy.
Oh, of course.
He's that giant, scary dude. He was in a Jet Li movie. He was in, it's always the same thing. He's just this big fighter that when you look at him, you're like, no one can beat this guy. And then the little guy does.
Yeah, well, because technique is always going to win out. And so, that's the other side of all this is it's interesting to see how he talks about Goliath and essentially saying, was this really the most formidable warrior, or was this, this giant person with this health condition that caused all these ailments, and it was just because he was so huge? Maybe he really was 8 feet tall. Maybe he really was 9 feet tall because he had this condition.
Which that changes how I feel about David killing him.
There's a lot to it.
And you also, I think it's so interesting that people always, they talk about the slang and everything, but people always neglect to mention the part of the story where David beheads him.
At the end,
Cuts his head off. I'm like, whoa. I remember.
It's rough.
Because that's a story you hear as a little kid, and you're like, yeah, I'm going to defeat my giants. And then you, as an adult, you actually read it, and you're like, wait, he did what?
I have a huge soapbox about the oddity of the stories we choose to tell children. Because there's that part where you usually just leave that part out of the story. Or a lot of times the story that shows up in Sunday school or VBS a lot is Samson and Delilah. And I'm like, have you read the story of Samson? It is
dark,
R-rated, man.
Yes.
It is brutal. There's so much death and destruction. And I was like, this is not... In what
but he's
way?
Super strong.
But he has long hair, and I'm just like, this is not for children.
It is not.
So there's a lot of that kind of stuff where I'm like, why do we start with these, violent or
because
unbelievable?
They're easy to animate?
Or
I don't know.
I guess, yeah. You can make them into a VeggieTales show, but I have always been confused why we pick some of these very odd stories to tell to children. There are way better ones to start with.
Probably. I always just want to start with the one where the bear kills a bunch of kids in the woods.
The she-bears?
Because
they call him Bald.
It was, what's his name, got mad because the kids were making fun of him, and then he sticks the bear on him.
Look at you, Baldy. And he's like, okay, look at you.
Baldy?
Now you're dead.
How about dead?
Yeah, there are so many scriptures where I'm like,
That's the one I want to start with. I want to teach kids that.
Is this a joke? I don't understand. Yeah, it's tough.
Oh, that's good stuff. All right. Well, that's good stories. I like it. Thanks for hanging out with us for episode 30.
30.
We did it. I don't know what that means, but feels like something.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a round number.
And I like it. We'll catch you in the next one.
See
Peace.
y'all.